Hello, welcome back to my channel. My name is Amanda and this is Birch and Lily, where I talk all about knitting. Today's video is all about how you can learn to knit without looking. Before we jump on in, make sure you hit that like and subscribe button. And if you're interested in finding me anywhere else on the internet, all of my socials are linked down below in the description, as well as everything that I will talk about in today's video. So I often talk about knitting without looking, knitting while I'm reading a book, knitting while I'm at the movie theater. I recently made a post on Instagram about knitting with my eyes closed, and it's something that blows a lot of people's minds. And to be honest, it's not hard. It just takes a teeny tiny little bit of practice. I will say I've found for myself there are a couple rules to knitting without looking. It definitely has to be a very simple stockinette or ribbed project. I find that if I'm knitting in the movie theater or while I'm reading a book, it definitely has to be a simple stockinette in the round sock like I'm working on right now, or in the round on the body of a garment, something like that. If I'm at home and I'm watching a movie, I can usually get away with doing some 1x1 rib or something slightly more complicated like that, but I definitely have to keep the project simple to be able to knit on it without looking. So I have written down kind of what I think the 5 steps to knitting without looking are, and I thought I would run through those with you today, and hopefully then you will have a new skill that you can use with your knitting. So number 1, you definitely want to make sure that you are able to fix mistakes in your knitting before you do this, because mistakes are inevitable to happen if you're not looking at your knitting needles. I drop stitches often in the movie theater and have to set my knitting down and pick it up and fix something that I've done, the drop stitch, or maybe I added an extra stitch in by accident. But I definitely have to be able to fix those so that I don't have to rip my whole project out if I make a mistake while I'm knitting and not looking. So once you're confident with being able to fix mistakes in your knitting, next step is to start really paying attention to how you knit. Pay attention to how those needles move in your hands, how the yarn slides across your finger, how you push stitches across the needles, all of those things, so that you kind of have an idea of what it should feel like as you're knitting a stitch. So for me, for example, and I'll probably pop some B-roll in here as well, I know exactly what a stitch feels like as it's moving across the needles, and I hold it with this finger. So then as I come to every stitch on my needle, I can kind of tell exactly where that needle has to go in so that I don't have to look. I can just do it. It's the simplest way to put it, I guess. But you really, really want to pay attention to all of the movements that you use, how you knit. I have heard it's easier to knit without looking as a continental knitter, but I've also seen people who are English knitters that can knit without looking. So I wouldn't let that stop you either. Just really, really pay attention to all of those movements that you're doing and kind of use your fingers as a guide. Once you're confident that you know exactly how you knit, you can kind of pick up all the steps to your stitches. Your next step is going to be to just knit a couple stitches while you're looking away. So knit a couple looking down at your knitting, and then look up and do a couple without looking, and then look down and make sure that everything looks correct. Make sure that you haven't made any mistakes or caught a stitch incorrectly, but give yourself grace as well, because nobody's perfect and you probably will make a mistake here and there. Like I said, I do all the time and have to set my knitting down if I'm in the middle of a movie or go to somewhere with some light so that I can fix my mistake. But look up, knit a couple stitches, look down, inspect it, make sure everything looks okay, and then keep going. And the more you do this, the more you're going to realize that you can just go and knit a whole row and not have to worry about looking down at your knitting. And step 5, practice. All it's going to take is a ton of practice. This was not something that came quick to me, but it took a lot of practice at home in the sunshine where I could see what I was doing and be able to look down at my stitches before I was able to just sit and knit without looking like I have been through this whole video. Like I said, give yourself grace. Make room for mistakes, make sure you know how to fix those mistakes, and you will be knitting without looking in no time, especially if you are someone who's been knitting for a decent amount of time and you're a pretty confident knitter. You should be able to pick it up pretty quickly. One other tip is to ensure that every once in a while, if you're knitting for a long time without looking, that you count your stitches. So, like I said, there's a chance you're going to drop something or you're going to accidentally make an extra stitch if you're not looking and knitting for quite a long time, especially in a place like the movie theater. So know how many stitches you have on each of your needles, and every once in a while just do a quick count as you're knitting down them and make sure that you have the right amount of stitches so that you don't go from a sock with 32 stitches on each needle to suddenly having a sock with 33 on one needle because for some reason you added an extra stitch in there and didn't pay attention and do the odd count while you're knitting. As for reading while you're knitting, I definitely prefer using a Kindle because I can just quickly stop what I'm doing, poke the screen of the Kindle, and then get back to what I'm doing, what I'm knitting on. But if you are a paperback type person, a book stand like this is going to be your best friend. They're like $20 on Amazon, and all you do is set the book on the stand and hold it down with these little tabs. They press tightly into your book, and then you'll have to obviously flip the page every time you need to, but it'll hold your book upright for you. I really like this one too because of these long legs that it has. They're adjustable, and then I can set it over top of my lap and my legs kind of hold it in place and it's not going to move. And then it's easy to flip the pages while I'm knitting and I need to flip a page. I also love these for cooking. That's a different aside, but it holds a recipe book really well as well. So there you have it. Those are my 5 steps with a couple extra tips on how I knit without looking. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask me down below in the comments. I'd love to try and help you out. I hope that you enjoyed this little bit different of a tidbit of info this week, and that you'll be knitting without looking in no time yourself. If you liked what you saw today, please consider subscribing and hitting that like button. It really helps the channel out a lot, and I will see you next week for a regular knitting podcast project video. Bye!